Do you think their kids are going to be the ones who are going to be on the front lines being drafted and going to war? Or is it going to be peasants like you and me? What's up, world? Welcome back to Cancel Thoughts. It's your boy Better Days here. So, feminism has done a lot of wonderful things for women. It's given them the right to vote, it's giving them the right to work, it's
It's just been awesome.
essentially given them the pursuit of happiness. And I think in many ways it's made them just the same as men. And I think in other ways it's fallen very, very short of that. But one of the things that I'm reminded of when I hear the topic of feminism is a video that I saw of Jordan Peterson when it was actually one of the first videos that I saw of him. He was talking with a feminist, and one of the things that they brought up was that feminism essentially focuses on the top 10% of men while ignoring the 90% of men, especially like when they bring up the wage gap and how men are, overrepresented at the top of society. And what Jordan Peterson was doing in this video that I'm talking about was he was essentially saying that men are also overrepresented at the bottom of society, and the feminists essentially had nothing to say about that.
99.9% of bricklayers are men. Should we have quotas for women?
Is bricklaying representative democracy?
That has nothing to do with the question. The question is if there's evidence of structural inequality and oppression because women aren't precisely represented at 50% in all professions at all levels, then why don't we have a conversation about having women represented in all professions at all levels? Why do we talk about the C-suite, for example? Why do we talk about politics and positions of power? Why don't we talk about it across the board?
Okay, so let's just pause and...
yeah, but that's because it's power.
You pose a question to Terry Butler. Go ahead and answer it, then we'll hear from the other panelists.
Now, full disclosure, I, like most people, would identify myself as a feminist in the original foundational meaning of the word.
Webster defines a feminist as a human being, not a woman, a human being that believes in equal rights for women. I was shocked that that's what that meant, because by that definition, I would consider myself a feminist.
Now, the third wave feminism that people term it nowadays is something that I'm not on board with at all. So this video today that we're going to be reacting to is a video that was coming from the Tim Pool podcast that he had a Fresh and Fit on very recently. And the topic of whether or not women should vote came up. And I think it's something that is very important for us to talk about, because I do unequivocally believe that women should have the right to vote. We, as all human beings in this world, are endowed with three unalienable rights: the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I believe that women, if they want to have the rights to all of those things, no matter what, they should also have a say in society. Now, what they bring up is a very valid point in this, and I'm gonna play the video really quick, and I'm gonna kind of get into it a little bit more. But before I do that, hit that like and subscribe button, guys. I'm trying to make sure as many people find this channel as possible, and I need your help to do so. So, without further ado,
with that. But I want to start with this tweet from Pearl Davis.
Okay.
It's got 12.1 million views, 1,734 reposts, 34,000 likes, has been quoted 3,638 times, and it is a picture of her wearing a shirt saying women shouldn't vote. Should women vote?
I think their vote should carry half as much weight as men's.
So you're in the middle. I'm in the middle.
I think women should have the ability to vote, and it depending on what position they hold. If they're in the military and they're some type of government service, then I think absolutely their vote should count all the way. But if it's just a female and she doesn't have any type of civil service or anything else like that, then I think it should be. And this goes for the men too.
Right.
Certain guys shouldn't vote either. If you're working at McDonald's, etc., should your vote count all the way?
Well,
no.
So then it's not a question of, in your mind, women. It's a question of, should people not engaged in civic duty vote?
Yes, but to be honest with it, let's keep it 1,000. That's going to immediately put a majority of women as only half voters.
Right.
All right. Nothing he said there is false. Now, I disagree with him in the idea that their vote should count 50% less. I think if you're a full citizen, like he said, if you're a full citizen and if you have some sort of civic duty, you should have the right to vote 100% of the time. And your vote should count just as much as anybody else's vote. I think what he's going to be getting at in this video is that the people who are, well, not necessarily patriots shouldn't have the equal right to vote, especially when things like selective service is involved and the person who essentially decides whether or not we go to war is the president, and we're all equally getting a vote in the presidency and who holds that office, especially if there's a certain segment of the population who's required by selected services to enter it, and then there's a certain segment of the population who's completely unexpected to go into selected services and not required to do so. Everything he's saying here is 100% correct, except for the 50% voting part. But I don't disagree with anything you just said so far.
Because that's the career fields that's the career fields and life decisions that women make in general.
Well, so yeah, do you want to respond to this?
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here, but I think part of the problem is that the view, I guess our views of women are so much different, because when I think of a woman, I think of a woman who runs a household and raises children and does the most beautiful thing that you can possibly do. So I see so much inherent value in, I think,
which we agree is important.
Okay, but I kind of feel like what we're doing here is we've trained as men, women, we've incentivized certain behavior, and now we want to discount them because they're giving the men what they're asking for.
I disagree a little bit with what he just said there, but I also agree with the idea that if you're a mother who's taking care of the household, your vote should also count, because you are necessarily doing the most important thing, honestly, to a society, which is nurturing the next generation of people, and that's something that I think feminism has lost, is its value of women who are homemakers, and their value to society isn't necessarily something that's quantifiable in numbers per se, but it's quantifiable in the state of the world. And I think
It's massive.
the reason that the world is in such a bad, well, the Western world, I would say, is in such a bad state, is that not enough women are entering into just becoming mothers, taking care of the home, and being that. Now, what he goes on to say about men incentivizing or training certain behaviors in women, I think that takes accountability away from women. I think women are adults and they can make their own decisions.
They're adults.
And if they're exhibiting certain behaviors, I don't think that's on men necessarily.
Is OnlyFans, Instagram, ass shots, and then we're saying now suddenly that they're somehow less valuable.
Takes two to tango. Well, right. A lot of the stuff that we're seeing women do, it's like men.
They're filling demand is all they're doing.
Well, we allowed them to do this, so you are correct in that sense, because as men we're leaders. But I will say this: if we're talking about votes here, women are more easily swayed to one direction or another, because once again, they follow leadership to depending on who they see as important. So ultimately speaking, if I'm gonna go for votes, I sway the women, I'm gonna win.
So you're saying, but what you're saying is that we as men are ineffective leaders, and therefore, because we cannot lead properly, that now the women should have a half a vote or no vote or whatever. Like, to me, I'm always like looking first internally. What did I do? How did I fail here? Or what was the point of failure that happened here in leadership? And everything I'm hearing is like men have failed in many.
Well, yeah, by letting women vote. So,
all right, I guess I don't disagree with him on everything like that he just said earlier. I'm talking about the white guy, and I don't know his name, but
It's a good point. It's a good point.
we should be accountable in ourselves. We should be looking at what we do wrong as individuals instead of trying to look outward at what other people are doing wrong. But the problem that I have with everything he's saying here is he's kind of taking accountability away from people who are exhibiting unfavorable or undesired behaviors, and just essentially putting the accountability and just on the men of society, which is like accountability should be on men, but it also should be on women. I don't think anybody has the right or anything to be able to escape accountability.
That's how they fail. I mean, let's keep it 1,000.
So first, I'll address what you said. I believe the science is clear that women are more agreeable, men are more disagreeable.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's harder to convince a guy. He'll challenge you. He'll headbutt you. A woman is going to try and make things smooth over. Yeah. There's a lot of positives to being agreeable and a lot of negatives to being disagreeable, and vice versa. It's pros and cons. Men and women are different and complementary.
Yes.
Now, there's an agenda, though. Of course, we can go deeper here, get more serious. But to be real here, men were at the helm of this because, once again, we put certain policies in place, we allow things to happen, and as a result, the family is destroyed. Now, when it comes to women, obviously, they're human beings as well. Equally, we're all human beings. But to be fair, when it comes to voting and political views, they can be swayed in any direction, which means, by default, they should vote.
But so
look, man.
I don't see what point this dude is making here whatsoever. He's just talking. I don't get any, like, there was no like logical trail to anything that he was saying. He was just like, well, since they can be swayed, they should be like, anybody can be swayed. What are you talking, like, what are you getting at there? If you tell some people, well, men are, yeah, obviously less swayed than women are because women are emotionally based. But if you tell anybody the right things at the right time, they can be swayed with anything. Like, what are you talking about?
Absolute nonsense.
What was the reasoning behind anything of what you're saying? That's why I think he's looking to his partner here to try to like to try to save him in a sense, because I don't think anything he said there is making any sense.
Women are communitarian in general. They tend to vote Democrat. They tend to vote for, hey, let's give everybody $1 versus giving the best person $1. They don't base their values a lot of times are not aligned with meritocracy. They want everyone to benefit, which is cool, I guess, if you like communism. But if you're a capitalistic guy, you want the best to succeed. And unfortunately, a lot of the times, women don't believe in meritocracy. They believe in communitarianism.
He's not wrong there whatsoever. Women are more communitarian and men are more meritocracy based. Now, everything he's saying there, I don't know where he's going with that, but that's a fact. Nothing he said there is wrong. I think there's a lot of people who were getting emotionally triggered by like this clip recently, but I so far I haven't seen him say much wrong here.
Facts.
I don't see him like, yeah. And by the way, I am a capitalist. I believe that if you work hard enough in this world, you deserve to be better than someone who doesn't work hard and is just expecting things to be handed to them.
Not all, but most.
We'll go back to some of the common points brought up from suffrage.
Yeah.
So this is typically, I feel like it's typically not talked about that there were a lot of women who opposed women's suffrage because initially it was tied to civic duty.
Yes.
Men who were voting had to be on the fire brigade. You had to, you could be drafted. You could go and die. And so with that, the idea is like, if we can force you to go fight and die, you get a say in a vote as to who decides.
Absolutely.
Women can't be forced to go off and fight and die, so they should not have a say in these matters.
That's a big part of the reason why I say they should get 50% is because women don't have to join the selective service. I can't tell you how many times we've done the podcast.
That's an argument for not voting at all.
Yeah. Do you even know? That's what I'm saying. That's why a lot of them should be limited. I ask women all the time, do you even know what the selective service is? Most of them don't even know it.
All right. What he's saying there is, like I said earlier, selective service is the main sticking point in this argument, which is that if I necessarily don't even have a choice in whether or not, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of men, if I don't have a choice in whether or not I can be drafted, because we don't at all. As soon as we turn 18, we're required to join the selective services. And in the case of a war, for those idiots who still don't know what the selective service is, we can be drafted. Let's say they don't have enough bodies to go to war. We can be drafted. We could go to war against our will or whatever, which, again, I think it will be a little harder to pull off nowadays because most people aren't doing anything against their will. But if I can essentially be drafted to war, I should, in my mind, and I agree with him on this, I should have more of a say in who decides if we're going to war. If me and you have an equal say in this and you don't have as much skin in the game as I do,
Make it made sense. Make it made sense.
that's ridiculous. That's completely 100% asinine, and I don't think anybody like can make any logical argument otherwise.
So what ends up happening is, and I have only a cursory knowledge of this, correct me if I'm wrong for those that are listening, feel free. I don't think I'm completely right on this. What I read was that a compromise was made. Women were not going to get suffrage because they were like, we don't want to go to war and we don't want a fire brigade. We want the men to do those things. Please leave us alone.
Yep.
And so that caused a point of contention where it wasn't going to move forward until finally the men who were running the show in Congress and stuff and relented and said, okay, women can vote and no civic duty. And everyone said, okay, we agree to that.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
That makes a lot of sense to me if you think about it. If you think about it logically, that makes a lot of sense to me. Someone's pee-pees got sucked between those two conversations. That's the only thing that can make sense to me whatsoever. It's like, all right, we went from women not getting the right to vote because they didn't want to go into selective service to, oh, we're just going to allow you to get the right to vote and also not be required to get into selective service. It's like, okay.
Something ain't right.
Something had to have changed between those two conversations, and I would wager that some peepees got sucked along the way somehow.
So where we're at now is we're in a completely different world. I do think women should be allowed to vote. However, I don't think anyone should be allowed to vote without civic duty. It makes no sense to me that someone can move into New York City without having any ties to the community, vote to destroy the place, and then leave. That's a problem. People, typically Democrats talk about how evil it was that only landowners were allowed to vote back then, but they're ignoring the context of history in that there were no ID cards. Voting was, do you live here or no? You don't live here? Okay, well, dude, you're not voting on how we're going to defend, facilitate, expand. That actually makes a ton of sense.
It does.
If you don't live in my house, you can't vote on whether or not we're going to install a hot tub or, a cold plunge. If we're roommates, we get to vote on what's for dinner. If you're my neighbor, why are you voting? Like, why did you invite your friend over to vote on what I get to have for dinner? And now he's leaving tomorrow and you're making me eat garbage food.
Well, this is why it's so.
Nothing that he said there is wrong, and I think that's the one that I agree with the most. This is like the most important thing that I think has been said in this video so far is that I think nobody, if they're not required to have any sort of civic duty, should be voting, and I'm in full support of that. And mind you, I'm one of those people who I am not going to war. If I have the choice of like relinquishing my right to vote and not having to sign up for selective services, I will relinquish that right. I don't care if you motherfuckers want to call me a coward. What I don't give a shit.
I'm okay. I'm good off that, little bro.
I want to keep my head on my shoulders, and the funny thing about this is, you never get a really accurate estimation of where you stand in the world until you're tested in a way that is symbolic of things that may actually happen when shit gets haywire. And I remember one time, me and my brother, we went paintball shooting and for his birthday or whatever, and I'm sitting there getting hit from left and right. And the only thing that I could think of in those moments was like, wait a sec. This is legitimately exactly what people do at war. And if I'm just standing here like getting hit over and over, could you imagine if these were real bullets?
Tragic.
I would have been dead 30 times over. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, yo, war is just not for me. I'm just not the guy to go to war. So if it comes down to relinquishing the right to vote and not having to like join selective services, listen, I will be the first one to sign up. Let me know where I sign, take the right to vote away, and I'm good. The problem that I have is that right now, men are required to register for selective services in order to really get any rights in America, whereas women are just allowed to skate from this responsibility. And I just don't think it's fair because what feminism claims to be about is the equality of men and women. But when it comes to stuff like this, nobody ever talks about it. I wonder why that is.
Important to have authority tied with responsibility. The problem is that we're giving people authority with zero responsibility, which goes back to the female voting situation, right? A lot of these women that vote, a lot of times they don't necessarily know how the government works, how the economy works, etc. And they're over here making very serious decisions and putting people like Sleepy Joe in office who don't necessarily deserve to be there. And
Sleepy Joe!
This magnificent planet. This conference is one of the most important meetings in history.
All right, one thing that I want to say is this. I was one of those stupid people who put Sleepy Joe in office, and I fully take responsibility for this. So it's not just women. I get it that women skew more Democrat, so that's the thing that we kind of point at. But I was one of those people too, and men are at fault for this as well. I don't want to put the responsibility just on women as to who is in office right now. Now, if you watch my earlier videos, you'll know I've vowed that I'm not going to be making a mistake like that again. I was emotionally manipulated in 2020 to vote in a way that I wasn't logically thinking about. And that won't be happening again next year.
Look at the maps, the voting maps. It's a fact. Women, if they do the map, if only women voted, whole country except for like one state is blue. If only men voted, whole country is red except for like one state. I am not saying that means women should not have their vote. I'm saying nobody should just be granted the right to vote in any capacity without some responsibility tied to it.
There's got to be checks and balances.
That's really
so you got to have some responsibility.
IQ test. You pass it, you can vote.
No, because that's subjective. You're asking someone else. Like the problem, but people have talked about things like this, tests of merit. Vivek Ramaswamy has said a constitution or civics test. If you're under the age of 25 and you want to vote, you got to pass the test. I'm like, that's nonsense because there's 26-year-olds who are dumb as a box of rocks.
Yeah.
There's 50-year-olds. There's men who are voting. Look, there are a large portion of conservative Republican-leaning women removing their vote. Why? They're 50-50 men. Men are voting Democrat too. I don't see a political argument for or against voting. I see a civic argument, genderless, right? I talked to Vivek Ramaswamy about this, and I thought one of a really good, simple idea that we brushed upon was the moment you sign up for the selective service, you're also granted a voter registration ID card. Registering to vote is the selective service. Here's what happens. This solves the problem for everybody. You don't have to go to war. You're not being drafted. The likelihood of that is extremely low. You're simply saying, I am willing to be in the event anything does happen. I know there are problems with that because I think the draft is really, really bad because you look at how the United States government has changed. It's one thing to say, hey, we're being invaded, to arms men. It's another thing to be like, we're sending you to Vietnam.
Yeah.
You know, in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, all that I'll avoid. But, you know, nonsense, false flags, fake reasons for getting into war. But think about what happens if you say, everyone's allowed to vote, but you got to sign up for selective service, men and women both.
That is a phenomenal idea. And I will give away that right to vote immediately. I will legitimately, like overnight, sign away my right to vote and remove my name from selective service. I don't give a fuck. Like people do not understand like the realities of war, and people are dying all around you. And I'm just not that guy. I know myself. Now, this doesn't mean I'm a bitch. Don't get that shit twisted. All right. This does not mean I'm a bitch. I would defend what's mine. The problem is that when you're going to war, I just have a very, very like innate problem with going to war because I think most wars are started because egos are involved, and I'm not trying to die to keep no rich people rich. Like that's the foundational thing that I think gets overlooked in this conversation a lot is that most wars are fought over stupid things like the war in Ukraine right now. Nobody knows exactly what it's being fought over. We just know that America is supporting overwhelmingly this war in Ukraine, which is weird to me, but hey, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I'm not gonna go too deep into that. But this idea of as soon as people register for selective services, give them their voter registration card as well, solves the problem overnight. I agree with Tim Pool 100% on that. And here's what's funny to me when we talk about drafts and stuff like this. The people who are in the power positions to decide whether or not we go to war, let's live in a hypothetical world here and say that the draft is something that could be potentially like happening or something that is required to happen in some way. Do you think their kids are going to be the ones who are going to be on the front lines being drafted and going to war? Or is it going to be peasants like you and me?
In chess, the pawns go first.
Ask yourself that question.
You are going to have 95% of low value individuals, men and women, being like, nah, I'm cool. I don't want to be involved in that at all.
Dang, bro, I gotta be low value just because I don't want to register to go fight and die at war? Jesus, bro.
You didn't have to say that.
I feel hurt here. What do you want, Tim? Golly.
About it. I mean, yeah, I think
it's not
that's,
perfect. I'm just saying it was an idea we brushed up.
No, that's a good solution. I mean, because my thing is, if you're going to have authority, you need to have responsibility too. And we've done a fantastic job in the modern day age of giving women a bunch of authority without necessarily giving them responsibility, and that's my issue.
Well, you haven't chimed in so far.
Look, I'm trying to wrap my head around the idea of what it would look like for women not to vote.
It would look like the 1950s. That's exactly what it would look like.
I think women should be able to vote, but
I'm not arguing that either.
I know.
Right?
I just don't. It's a hard because like there is some merit to some of the things that are being said, but like I don't think there is a solution. I mean I would consider myself more high value, and I personally would not want to sign up for this current government to then draft me.
You already signed up for selective service.
Just as being a man,
18 years old, you have to.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's something that never gets brought up. The minute I turned 18, I had to register for selective service. It's like, yo, so let me get this straight. I was born with a penis, so I automatically now just have to fight. How does that make any sense? And whenever these conversations get brought up, the feminists are nowhere to be found. It's funny how shit like this works out, isn't it?
So it would just be adding women then.
So it's not even about women. It's about the moment you sign up for selective service, you are registering to vote and receiving a voter ID card. That's it.
I think the real solution here is to just abolish selective service. Now, there's going to be a lot of problems that manifest themselves as a consequence of that, but I think that's honestly the only way to like alleviate all of these concerns for people is to just abolish selective service as a whole. Because one, I don't want men who are forced to go fight in a war to go fight in a war anyway, because they're not going to fight their hardest because they never wanted to do this in the first place. And trust me, I'm one of those people that if you forced me to go to war, I'm not going to be fighting in a war. I'll damn near like join the other side if we're losing. Yo, this makes me sound so unpatriotic. Hey, I love America, guys. I'm just Don't I don't think people should be forced to go to war if they don't want to. That's just a fact to me. Like,
Man or woman, doesn't matter. If you're a dude and you say, I'm not signing up for that, well, then you can't vote.
What about immigrants?
If you're a citizen.
Okay.
Not like nonsense. So my view for immigrants is if you sign up for U.S. service, you should be given expedited access to becoming a citizen.
Agreed.
Like you're willing to fight for us.
Agreed.
Follow our rules. You have someone in command telling you what to do. And so a lot of people say like, I don't want to get drafted. I signed up for that. Listen, the only people voting are going to be the people who could be drafted. Right now, you've got people who can't be drafted voting on behalf of us who can.
Yeah.
That's nonsense.
I agree.
Yeah.
he's speaking 100% fucking facts there. He's 100%. Yo, if you guys want to vote and put Sleepy Joe in office, like Myron just said earlier, no problem. You should have to deal with the consequences of him being in office just as much as I do.
And that's why I said that is why in general I say the basis for why a woman's vote should only be 50% is a big reason because of the selective service. But if they want to join in the selective service or they want to be involved in civic duty or they want to be involved in the military, police, etc., then I'm like, cool. Because a lot of people say, oh, well, women fought for the right to vote. A lot of people don't know what you said before. They don't want to deal with the responsibility that came alongside with it, with having to be a volunteer for fire brigade.
This is why it's not about whether women can vote or not. It's about whether anyone. Like, if there's a dude who's like, I ain't going to go fight for this country, it's like, well, then don't vote on our issues.
Yeah.
Don't vote on how we spend tax money.
Yeah.
Don't vote on how we defend our borders.
All right, I'm going to end this video there. Last thing that he said there was spot on. And like I said earlier, listen, I will give up that right to vote if that means I'll never be eligible to get registered for selective services and I'll never be eligible to be in a draft. I'll give up that right immediately. But final thoughts on this is that, listen, we all talk about how and feminism has come under fire recently, especially for some of its outcomes for women in particular. But we all talk about how feminism has been like a good thing throughout history for women. It's only recently that we've talked about how the negatives of feminism. But what we don't ever talk about, and I don't ever hear the feminists talk about, is what about the negatives aspects of being a man that you guys necessarily don't want? Because right now, what feminism has done is it's given women the privileges and rights that come with being a woman, and it's also given them the privileges and rights that come with being a man, and it's given them none of the consequences of either. And I just don't think that's a fair world. And if feminism is claiming that it's for fairness and equality and all that nonsense, like the feminists claim that they're for, then you should be fighting for this too. You should be fighting to be just as much of an option for the selective services as men are. You shouldn't have the right to just be able to vote in some idiot like Joe Biden is right now and be able to just skate from the consequences of that. And we're getting closer and closer to war. In case people don't know, I think they might go on to say this, I don't know. But in case people don't know, we're starting to send troops over to the war in Ukraine, which is something that we shouldn't be doing whatsoever because it's not our fight, even though it technically is kind of our fight because we're funding most of it. But we're getting dangerously close to launching World War III. So the idea that this is some hypothetical that's like could never happen in reality is asinine to me because we're getting closer and closer to this reality. And most people are sitting there like, yo, you guys, and I'm included in these people, I'm one of these people that put this idiot in office and he could blow up the world like that. And all of us would just be looking dumbfounded.
If you liked what you heard today, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you didn't like what you heard, thanks for watching the whole video. Consider leaving a comment in the comment section and telling me exactly what you disagreed with. Either way, thanks for joining me on this video, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.